Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm Lindsay Smith with Real Agriculture, and joining me now is Christine O'Reilly, the Grazing and Forage Specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. I call it OMAFA. Nobody else likes that. Christine, welcome here.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Now, I wish, well, let's back up a step. We usually get to talk about all sorts of wonderful things about forages. Now, though, we've had a pretty rough go in Ontario as far as rainfall, especially even for the area that you live in. And for many farmers in very specific areas, it has been a brutal drought. Some rains have returned, but we're also the last week of August here. And there are a lot of conversations right now about grazing, emergency forage, trying to maybe grow some covers, critical harvest periods, all that. So I want to unpack it. So Christine, let's start with, because I saw just yesterday, I think on Twitter, you mentioning if you're putting in oats, we really have a limited window here to get them to a critical period where they're actually going to create feed. So what do we have to consider first?
Yeah, so the conversation in a lot of very dry pockets of Ontario since winter wheat harvest has been, should I put in oats now when there's no rain in the forecast, or should I wait? So some growers did stick the wheat or did stick the oats in. And I've heard stories of oats that have been in the ground 3 weeks. Luckily, they didn't imbibe any water, although that is a bad thing that we didn't get water for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And are coming up now. They're a little variable, but the stand overall looked good. So like that's a great news story that job is already done on that farm. But a lot of people were waiting because we know better than to plant cereals into dry soil. So the problem now is that we're running out of growing season. It takes oats typically 60 to 70 days in the fall to hit boot stage. And that's just because we're not accumulating growing degree days as quickly in the fall as we do in the spring, where it's like 45 days to boot. So if we want to get enough growth on those oats that we could harvest that as baleage or as silage, depending on where you are in Ontario, either we are a week or so out of time, or we've only got a week or a little bit left. So, yeah, just because of that slower growth in the fall, I think if farmers are sitting on the fence about whether or not to seed oats, if they're going to do it, it's got to be now, regardless of what that forecast looks like, just because if we wait any longer, there's not going to be enough growth to justify that harvest, unfortunately. Grazing, you maybe could push it a little later, like depending on, again, where you are exactly in the province, maybe September 10th, maybe September 15th if you're somewhere really warm, lots of heat units. But again, we got to get enough growth to make it worth grazing if that's the plan as well. So, yeah, that was just the reminder that I sent out the other day. Was just, if you're still sitting on the fence because the forecast isn't perfect, it's time to make a decision because that forecast may not be perfect in time to capture what's left of the growing season.
And I think, it's a key distinction that you make between potentially taking it as hay or silage or baleage or silage versus grazing it off. At the same time, moving animals, setting up fence, moving water is also an undertaking. So, you want there to be enough growth there. But I'm here in the Ottawa Valley. We've been lucky to get decent rain in the last little while. It looks like we're maybe in a cycle of getting a bit more. So exactly that, anyone who did put in some cover crops or some oats or something like that, they're germinating and they're coming up. But it's still, if we have a beautiful open fall, great. And we've had some of those in the past few years. That's not our average. Like the extended open fall we've been enjoying is not necessarily the expectation. So I am a little nervous about that. So that is one thing. So the second part to this, and we could probably do a 7-part series on all the different ways that you can extend the grazing season, etc. But one of the other things, and we're doing this on our farm because we were very dry, we do typically graze our ram lambs we take third cut, sometimes fourth cut, depending on the year. We use our ram lambs to do that and to graze, but we are, and I'll admit it, in our critical harvest period. So we know this may bite us in the spring. And maybe you can explain why or what I'm preparing myself for mentally. First, let's talk about what is the critical harvest period. Is it just for alfalfa? And then we'll sort of take the conversation from there.
Yeah, so I don't, maybe I'm being pedantic, but I've always thought critical harvest period is a confusing name because it sounds like the time when you must harvest as opposed to the
Right.
time when you really shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So I've been trying to skew OMAFA resources to say fall rest period because I think that more accurately
I like it.
describes
Okay.
what we're trying to do. We're not the only people calling it that, but
Okay.
I'm just trying to skew
I
our
like it.
publications that way just because I think it more accurately describes what we're trying to do.
That's right.
So our perennial forage crops need some time in the fall to take all of the sugars they're producing photosynthesis and store them in their lower stems and roots so that they can use that energy to green up and grow in the spring. That's where they're getting the fuel to grow new leaves from the next year. So alfalfa has published dates for a fall rest period. That's based on research that was done. Um, Basically, it's 450 growing degree days, that's base 5 Celsius, before the first killing frost. And for alfalfa, a killing frost is -4 degrees Celsius for at least 4 hours. Okay, so killing frost definition varies with plant species.
Right.
Growing degree model varies with plant species, but for alfalfa, we've got a very solid
Right.
handle on how much time alfalfa needs to do that regrowth to put enough energy in root reserves that it's going to come back strong in the spring. Typically, that 450 growing degree days takes about 6 weeks. So the average start date is what, for those of you who've seen the map, there's a map that OMAFA has published. So the dates on there are the average start date based on the average date of the first killing frost.
Right.
So it's not a perfect guide, but it gives you a good sense of, what might be typical in the part of the province where you're growing alfalfa. So that's the main one that we're thinking about. Birdfoot trefoil also has a well-defined fall rest period. It starts 10 days before alfalfa.
Okay.
So you can just look at the alfalfa
And
map and
move
move
it.
the date up 10
There you
days and
go.
you've got your trefoil date.
Okay.
We don't have published guidelines for the rest of our perennial forage species. And I suspect that's because historically they weren't valuable enough for anyone to bother. Like we can hammer a grass heavy mix or a grass clover mix and it comes back the next year. And if you don't have enough yield, it'd be easy to go down the road and rent another 50 acres and you're fine. So for crops like that, we don't have published data, but that doesn't mean the biology
Right.
is different. They still need some type of rest in the fall to harden off, to build root reserves, to really prepare for winter. Um, so that's the why.
Mm-hmm.
That's the why. um, when it comes to a year like the one that we've had, and there are people that are struggling with forage inventory, I know that the agronomy is the first thing that goes out the window. So if you need the feed and there is enough worth cutting or enough worth grazing in that alfalfa hayfield, take it. But the thing I want you to think about is the plan that you should be making over the winter on what you're going to do that spring. Because you've added extra stress to that crop if it doesn't have the energy to regrow. Because what happens is, like, if you were to cut in the middle of your fall rest period, so that's week 3, week 4, at that point, the plant has enough growing season left that it's taking energy out of storage to grow new leaves and stems, but it doesn't have enough time to use those new leaves to put energy back in the tank. So that's why the middle of the rest period is the riskiest for a winter kill problem. Right. If you were to cut at the very beginning or the very end, right, like that either has enough time to kind of go through that regrowth cycle and refill the tank, or it doesn't have enough time to start regrowing. And either of those are less risky than cutting right in the middle.
That's actually one of the key things that I think that it can sometimes be hard to wrap your head around, in that I think it looks worse, right? In that you're grazing off so close to maybe a snowfall or freeze up or whatever. But if you think about the plant's actual biology, that plant had ample time to put root reserves, to put those, and it's not going to use that to try and regrow.
Fall. They're
go
still
to
there for the
sleep.
spring. Yeah,
Exactly. So that was
absolutely.
for me, I think that was like, or for us was like a hard thing to sort of wrap our heads around, but it's like, no, that makes sense that if you are going to
Mhm.
take that forage, actually waiting later, because then that plant is not in danger of trying to regrow this fall, it'll wait till spring. So, which is, I think, a key
Exactly.
part. Yeah. So, and you mentioned, and again, and I think this is incredibly key in a tough year where, maybe stored feed has already been fed out, or, to try and give your pastures a rest, or if maybe you didn't put up as much hay. I mean, thankfully, a lot of us got good first cut, even maybe second cut. But it's been since then that nothing has really, no rainfall, nothing's really regrown. Um, I mean, it's still though, like we have to have a plan, recognizing that
Mhm.
if we're cutting hay now or grazing it off this fall, and that wasn't the plan at the spring where we planned for this, we may need to address some of this in the spring. So what would be some of the things we should be planning for? Like, can we fix things with fertility? Do we need to reseed? Like, what would my list start to look like of like, okay,
Yeah.
plan B?
So if we're focusing on alfalfa for another minute or two, um, with alfalfa, your risk of winter kill has gone up. Now it will depend a bit on the kind of winter we have. Do we have freeze thaw cycles? Does it ice? All of those other things, right? But yeah, I would say your early warning system in the spring, go scout that field at green up. If your plant count, plant count per square foot is below threshold, and the threshold changes with the age of the stand because alfalfa crowns get larger and the stand thins as the
Right.
crop gets older. So if your plants per square foot is below the economic thresholds, we've got these up on fieldcropnews.com. We've got them in publication 30, which is the guide to forage production. Then that's a stand that is not economically worth keeping.
Right.
So the plan should be to terminate that stand, rotate it into something else because alfalfa is autotoxic. You can't establish alfalfa after alfalfa without serious hits to yield potential. Okay, because autotoxic
Right.
allelopathic chemicals damage roots, even if germination happens. It's bad news bears.
Right.
So
That's a technical
that
term,
the
everybody. Bad
bad
news
news bears,
bears.
very
Yeah.
technical. So yeah, no, the plan would be if the plant count is below threshold at green up, that's a field that needs to be terminated and rotated. Think about where you would put a new seeding of alfalfa somewhere else on the farm. Okay.
Yeah.
Once you've got 6 inches of growth in the spring, that's the time for a stem count. So the stem count correlates more closely to yield potential than the plant count, but the plant count is your early warning system. You've got more time in spring, so you've got more options. Because maybe your plant count was it was kind of on the edge. Maybe it's
Yeah.
it's kind of the low end of normal. You might be able to patch that, put some red clover, overseed with red clover, overseed with grass, right? Those are options that you could do early enough. By the time you've got 6 inches of growth, overseeding is going to be a little less successful because your new seedlings are now going to be competing for light and water with your established.
Established. Right. Yeah.
That's harder. So your 6 inches, you're looking at a stem count. So the minimum threshold, I think, is 55 stems per square foot. So these are, remember, an alfalfa crown sends up multiple stems,
Right.
right?
It's
So
stems. It's not
it's a different
plants.
count.
It's
It's
stems.
stems, not
That's right.
plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's below that threshold, you've already missed out on 25% of your yield potential, right? Like the maximum it
Yeah.
could hit is 75. And this is before we stress it with, insects or diseases or multiple cuts in a year. Like this is
Yeah.
coming out of the gate in the spring, you're only at 75% of yield potential. So if it's less than 55 stems per square foot, that's a sign that maybe after first cut, that field should be terminated and rotated into something else.
Right. And
So that's
yeah, and I guess
that's your
that's
alfalfa.
yeah, that's okay. That's alfalfa. What about
That's
grass,
alfalfa.
or mostly grass, or what I call the one cut wonders that we have here in Ontario?
Not all of them are one cut wonders.
Some of them
But
are.
yeah, no, anything that's grassy. Um, in the fall, especially, if you can give those pastures or hayfields a bit of a rest, that really helps.
Okay.
50 pounds an acre of nitrogen will also encourage grasses to tiller in the fall. So that has to go on like early fall
Okay.
so that they've got time to grow and tiller. But when we're talking about hay and pasture, leaves are yield, right? So having more tillers, especially to fill in any bare gaps that might have happened from that stress of really dry conditions, Yeah, a little bit of nitrogen can go a long way to just help perk that back up. Um, and, assess in the spring. A little bit of nitrogen in the spring may help. That one's a judgment call because many farms have a hard time keeping up with the spring flush, particularly on a pasture as it
Hmm.
is. So adding nitrogen to that makes that problem worse. So that one is not a universal. Like the plants love it, but do you need the
Yes.
feed?
Do you
So
need, yeah,
yeah, so that one's more of a judgment call. But in the fall, for sure, that
for
helps
sure.
thicken up a very grassy stand. Um, the other one to think about is your other nutrients, right? Balanced nutrition helps any crop. Um, the best bang for your buck on potassium is kind of the month up to 6 weeks before the fall rest period starts. So we've kind of closed in on
Christine, that was forever
on that
ago.
moment right now. Not saying that it's not helpful.
Right. But like that was a while
Yeah,
ago.
well, it depends. Again, it depends where you are. Like
Yeah.
the month to 6 weeks before the fall rest period, I know if you were to put it
Yeah.
on now, it's not going to hurt. But just the
Okay.
reason that
Yeah.
it's suggested it goes on before the fall rest period is because potassium is used to regulate water in the plant, and it's part of that winter hardening process. So if it's on before the fall rest period starts, we know the plants have the nutrition they need
Right.
to do all their winter prep. If it goes on now, it's not going to hurt. It just might not be the most optimum time,
Okay.
but it will still help, especially because we know these plants are stressed.
I'll be honest, Christine, I think that, and I am guilty of this as well, forage producers, if forage is much of what you do, or even if it's mixed and you have grain too, forages probably don't get nearly the fertility they're supposed to get. So even if we're a little late with the fertility, I think it's probably still okay. Because
Late
traditionally
is far better than never. I
yeah,
agree. Late
never.
is better than never.
Exactly. This is what I'm
Late is
saying.
better than
And
never.
yeah, exactly. So that is very
Yeah.
helpful. Okay. Let's leave it there. But as you mentioned, we've got some really great resources out there. And of course, producers can contact you as well. And
Mhm.
maybe I'll even squeeze in an agronomist here shortly. But, thanks so much for joining me here on Real Agriculture. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.